Hello and welcome to our Florida podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee, and I bring you stories from Florida's history. I like to share stories about Florida's wild places and the people that have called the state home long before we did.
And I am your other host, May, and every other Monday as well, I share about Florida's unique wildlife and ecology or current events that are currently impacting wild Florida.
Sweet. So we're getting a little bit out of order this week because we got a very special episode I'm excited to bring you. So you heard from me last week, but you also get to hear from me this week. Also give Megan a chance to reset after all those freaking FWC and Black Bear episodes that
Woohoo.
were a lot. So we are in June now, so that means happy birthday month to me. As well as Happy Pride Month. So this episode will be celebrating Florida LGBTQ history. Just like with Black History Month and Women's History Month, we intend to share stories of everyone all year long, but I love a good theme to guide my research, so I was excited to really dive down this rabbit hole this week. I also feel like it's important to me to share positive stories when we're specifically talking about these celebratory months. So, I don't want to tell a story of just pain and suffering and be like, yay, pride, woohoo guys, yay, women's history, yay, Black history. So with that, when I was doing my research, I found what I unfortunately kind of expected, and that is that Florida isn't and hasn't ever really been doing a great job when it comes to acknowledging, respecting, and upholding gay and trans rights. So instead of telling a specific story of how Florida has had a massive success in this thing, I wanted to share a more general timeline that will touch on the efforts of multiple generations, the wins, the setbacks of the LGBTQ rights in Florida, and so on. And honestly, I'll be straight up here too, I didn't know how much I didn't know when it came to LGBTQ rights and civil rights. I don't know whether it's a product of my public Florida school education or a product of the church that I grew up in, but I think most of us probably have a lot that we need to learn about civil rights and the civil rights movement, but particularly LGBTQ stuff. I had no clue, and to the extent that I didn't know what I didn't know. So with this episode, as I was learning and going through a timeline, I was we need to talk about all of this because I can't be the only one. So hopefully this is not straight white girl explaining pride to everybody, but in some ways it might be. So give me grace. Let me know what y'all think about this episode and everything. But I thought it would be, like I said, I initially started out, I was I'm going to find one activist. I'm going to find this one really cool person and share their story, kind of like what we did with Women's History Month. But as I got into it, I was just yes. And then it's immediately, not immediately, but followed up with a, wait, what? And so I thought it just made more sense to try to tell things in order as much as you can when you're covering, 400 years of history. Wish me luck and run along for the ride. Anything you want to add?
I'm excited. I mean, like you said already, we've always had an interesting background, the church we grew up in. Neither one of us have always had too much knowledge about it other than we're supportive. We don't have any issues. Definitely neither one of us, I think, at least for myself, I don't know much about the history. I don't know what the civil rights, what that's looked like. I don't know any of that. So I'm pretty excited. I feel like I'm definitely going to learn quite a bit of information in this one. And hopefully I'll get to go out and do my own research after this and learn more.
There are a lot of really good resources in this episode. If anyone is whoa, that's interesting, I want to learn more, do it, go for it, because a lot of these topics could be their own episode, but it just, was how the story came together this week. So, all right. So where does the story start? Frickin' $1 million question, guys. But that's hard to say. Going back, it seems the first known recorded case of homosexual activity receiving a death sentence in North America occurred in 1566 when the Spanish executed a Frenchman in Florida. So we actually have that on record from 1566. In the 80s, Florida became a territory of the United States and adopted the country's strict sodomy laws, which are extremely vague and will be debated in courts for the next 100+ years. But I think it's important to note that these laws are vague in the sense that it's not like sodomy laws that's just about homosexuality. These laws that they're using to, in some cases, give homosexual people the death penalty are extremely vague. It includes things like bestiality, it includes pedophilia, not just consensual sex between two men, and actually most of the early iterations of the law don't even think about, they don't even talk about women at all. It seems like they can't even conceive of the idea that two women would be in a relationship together. So it's not even included in the law.
So basically, at this point, it's just two men that are only being considered as like homosexuality. Is that what you're saying? And women can't even like be kind of fathomed as that, or
kind of like as far as like gender stuff. But the other thing that's included in these laws is bestiality, sex with animals, pedophilia, sex with minors. All of that is looped into this one, this is bad sex. Technically, this also includes things like oral or anal sex, even if it's a heterosexual couple.
What?
Yeah, like that's what I'm trying to get at. Is these laws that are like put in the 80s that are happening all across the nation, this isn't just a Florida thing, are extremely vague and tie in anything that is deemed sexually deviant.
Sex involved in whatever. Okay.
So just keep that in mind, because yeah. And of course, like, I want to emphasize that these are not the same thing. Like, pedophilia and a consensual adult relationship, no matter the genders, not the same thing. But in the eyes of the law in 1820s Florida, 1830, 1840, 1850, they are deemed to be the same thing. Which is just, it's extremely evil. It's very misleading. It makes me very mad, and I'd love to say that that's the last time that we'll deal with something like that in this episode, but it is not. So, now, despite these strict laws that in many cases came with the death penalty, through the Digital Trans Archive, there are reports that I found. First of all, this is a really great source that was really neat. It's called the Digital Trans Archive, and through it you can search different keywords. So, like, I searched Florida history, blah, blah, blah. And it will pull up different reports. So, news articles, pictures, playbills, in some cases, videos and vocal archives. That's not the right word. Like, people recording themselves, recorded archives and stuff of different trans people through history. So on there were reports of slaves that were discovered to have been cross-dressing or to have been hermaphrodites. And hermaphrodite means that they have both sexual organs. Often these cases are reported after their death and they're being prepared for burial and are sensationalized into public record. This also isn't to say that it was only slaves or that the black population where this was happening, just that these were the least empowered to control the narrative around them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and there's one case of a slave or former slave, Francis Thomas, who actually dressed as a woman for 15 years. And it's unclear to me as to whether or not he got in trouble. I think they like tried to get him in trouble, and then he was like, well, I think if anyone's to blame, it's my master. Lots of old-timey language and really difficult to read newspapers. But yeah, there's a couple clippings of where he was interviewed after a thing and then also announcing his death and stuff. But in these cases, all the examples I found, there was also another example of a woman who was discovered to be a hermaphrodite after her death. And like I said, it's always the ones that I found from that time period, like, you know, late 1860s, 1870s, were from slaves. And I want to emphasize again here that just because those are the cases we have doesn't mean that it was only the slaves or the African population. It was just that they, in many cases, literally didn't have control over their own bodies. So, like, they could, and also it's coming out after they're dead, so they don't have any control over that narrative. Whereas if a white person is cross-dressing or something, their family is going to be in a better position of power to cover that up or, you know, keep that to themselves. Continuing through the timeline and the Digital Trans Archive, we get into the 90s and 40s, where I found a lot of advertisement for the Jewel Box, a drag show with both kings and queens that was going to be playing in Miami and had lots of excitement and buzz. And that is the next pictures that are up there, which I just thought this was so cool because I had, once again, and I'm so sorry to our LGBTQ audience because I might say this a lot, but I was entirely oblivious. I had no idea the drag shows were going on in the 30s or 40s. I just assumed it was unaccepted, and obviously societally it kind of was unaccepted, but they had quite the audience, and this looks like it was quite the show. But yeah, they're gorgeous. I just genuinely didn't know that that existed at that time. But yeah, I think that's also really important to realize, like, this has always existed. And they actually reference that in, like, the first page of the program. And they talk about, like, don't you think this, you know, we always get asked, is this unnatural? And, well, the first theater, you know, Shakespeare and everything, everybody in the theater was played by men and young men. So people have been cross-dressing for entertainment for centuries, which I thought was a very valid point.
I think that's an extremely valid point. Also, the pictures from this, they look so cool.
They look very cool.
They look so cool.
Yeah, I loved. I don't know if I included that one, but like one of the kings. I did think it's interesting at that time too. They gender everybody, like even if they're a queen, they say he, or if they're a king, then they say she. But like one of the kings, they have a picture of her with her dog. Like when she's not doing this, she's hanging out with her dog, and I was like, yeah, of course, absolutely.
As it should be.
Yeah. So, once again, not that this view is popular among everyone at the time, but I think it's cool to see these pictures and stories of people living their life, even if it had to still be fairly underground at this point. So, as we move into the 50s, it seems like there was like this small period where there's like maybe just a little bit more freedom, and in general, the American attitude is a little bit lax. Like there's just this small little area of time after World War II and before the Cold War really gets ramped up, where generally the American attitude just gets a little less control-y or like hyper Christian, hyper right, hyper whatever. And during this time, through that trans archive, I found a couple of different stories about trans women living in Miami. So the next slide, you'll see pictures of Christine Jorgensen from 1954. Christine was an American actress, singer, recording artist, and transgender activist. A trans woman, she was the first person to become widely known in the United States for having sex reassignment surgery. She was drafted and served in the country in World War II, and then after her military career, she studied photography and learned about successful sex reassignment stories out of Denmark, and went there in 1951 to begin her operations. Afterwards, she returned to the U.S., wrote a very popular autobiography, and then became a popular singer, all of that stuff.
Okay, so she had this, she served in World War II after her transformation, correct?
No. So World War II was in the 40s.
Oh, that's right. Jeez. Oh my gosh.
No, you're good.
Good point. I was like, hold up. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, women were barely able to serve.
Yeah, that's where I was like, wait, hold on. Here's where I was just, okay, that makes a lot more sense. I forgot about that big factor here.
Yep. So yeah, and then it's after serving. She's a veteran, a World War II
veteran.
And then goes to Denmark, has her surgery, comes back, builds a career as a singer and actress, is very popular, writes this autobiography that's very popular. So I think it sold like over 20,000 copies, which I think was, especially for what it is, like that's a very big deal at that time. And evidently, she spent a lot of time in South Florida, and that's why she's part of this episode. Because you can see there's a lot of pictures of her here on a boat in a South Florida harbor.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah. Another example I found was from a newspaper article titled "Bride Revealed as Former GI. Sex Change," all caps.
Former GI.
GI as in military service.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm like, gender identity?
No.
I was like, I don't know what this is.
Military.
Got it.
Yeah, despite the inflammatory title, I thought it was actually a pretty good article. It features a picture of Miss Ralph Heidel, which I think is like Mrs. Ralph Heidel, because it's like her husband's name, formerly Charles McLeod, who also served in World War II, and after he inherited some money, went to Denmark for surgery and returned to South Florida. When she and her husband got married, the preacher and neighbors had no idea, which was the main point of the article, and like that's what they're really sensationalizing, is like, oh, this bride is revealed to have been a soldier, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, the interviews in there are pretty funny. Like, the neighbor's like, I had no idea. She's so beautiful. She's like, I forget what dated example she gives. I had to look it up. But basically, like, she's like a pinup girl. And then they asked the preacher if the preacher had any idea. And he's like, no, they just were a nice couple that comes to church. And his quote is like, what are the deacons going to say?
I saw that, yeah.
And it continues to share that the couple comes to church every Sunday, etc. And it's like, well, yeah, they're normal people. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. Also, once again, I had no idea that you could have gender affirming care in the 50s. That was like, especially that was so good. So
it makes me wonder, like, why, like, I know we've made a little bit of progress in that, but 75 years later, why haven't we made better progress? You know?
That's exactly what
I didn't like. Well, when I know you started like with the history of it, I definitely was not expecting to be hearing that. Okay, in the 50s and whatnot, we were doing surgeries and things, and I'm like, it's 2025 now. Why aren't we doing better? So
excellent question, and the dilemma I kept hitting up against a wall this whole time doing all this research. I'm like, yes, that's so cool. Like, these drag queens are fabulous. I love this. Wait, why are we banning drag shows now?
So
why this exists?
Yeah, exactly.
Why are we doing this almost 100 years later?
I do have a question though, which you might have to look up more into. I don't know if you did, but I was reading that article and it goes to say that he said when they came to be married, he had no reason to believe there was anything unusual. Does that mean that her husband didn't know? Is that what they're saying? Is that just how they
No,
phrased
that's
it to make it seem that way, to make it like a
that's the
bigger deal in
preacher's
news article?
perspective. That's the
Okay,
preacher's perspective. I'm
that makes more
assuming
sense
husband
too.
knew. That's none of my business. Honestly, the whole thing isn't any of anybody's business, but I
No,
still
of
thought, like,
course not.
for the time, I thought the article was, like, decent.
It definitely, I've seen way, I mean, on the internet, people say way worse. So for a news article, I think it's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now we start getting into some fuckery. In the late 1950s, the nation saw the start of the Cold War and a witch hunt for communists and communist sympathizers. This is the era of the McCarthy trials, and the Florida governor set in motion a committee led by Charlie Johns to out communist leaders in the community. So at this point, we're our Cold War with the Soviet Union. It's communists versus capitalism, and communism versus democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And so therefore, there's nothing but these witch hunt trials going on all across the country to flush out any of these communists. So initially, this group, the Johns Committee, they set out to go after the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, trying to say that the NAACP is full of communist spies. And this was like a really common target, or like very common tactic used to go after different groups and minorities and people that you don't like. You just say that they are a communist. Actually, like The Crucible, the movie that was made, The Crucible, a lot of its inspiration came from these McCarthy trials because they got a ton of people deported and in jail, and then like Hollywood and all these different areas. So with it, like in theory, you're going after the communist spies that are infiltrated in the country, that are evil, etc. And I'm not saying that there weren't communist spies, but it became a tool that you could go after minorities, people you don't like, political opposition, and stuff like that. And you see that in this example of this Johns Committee in Florida, where the first thing that they do is go after the NAACP and try to get these members pegged as communists first.
Insane.
Yeah, it's a very messed up, very ugly part of American history. Just, I don't have good words for it. Like, and it, once again, I don't want to say like, oh, it's not that there weren't communists or that there weren't communist spies, but the whole attitude towards it and this witch hunt and this ability to then seize property, to deport people, and without real proof in many cases, on vibes basically, being able to do this is insanely messed up. So they try to go after the NAACP, and for the most part, the NAACP, because it's backed nationally, and had funding nationally, and they had their own lawyers and everything. It was a very organized system at this point. They were able to keep the Johns Committee kind of tied up in courts. So they weren't able to get anywhere. Now, I don't want to say I try not to. There were so many avenues for this research to go, so I try not to get too into different rabbit holes. So I'm not saying that they didn't get any of the members of the NAACP taken out, but generally they weren't very successful. And to the point that the Johns Committee was about to start losing funding if they didn't start finding these communists. So instead, after going after NAACP, they switch gears to looking for communists in the lesbian and gay community. And they do this first by going through the school system. And so,
I'm sorry, we're doing what now?
we're targeting lesbian and gay students and teachers.
Yes, because that makes a whole lot of sense. Okay.
So the thought is that lesbian and gay students are more likely to be communist. They don't have any good evidence for this at all.
Is there any science backing this? Is there anything backing this? I can't imagine there is, but like...
No.
Okay, cool.
The only thing that I saw cited as like an argument for this, and I won't say a good argument, but as an actual argument for this, is they say that if someone is lesbian or gay, then they are more likely to be able to be blackmailed, which makes them dangerous to have in a position of teaching or in government or something. That's the other place they're going for anybody that would be lesbian and gay or in government, that they can say, oh, they're communists. And the idea is like, oh, well, you could be blackmailed because you don't want that out about yourself. And it's like, well, if the concern is that people could be blackmailed, What if we just destigmatize this
And
and then
there's
people
no
can be open
option.
and live their life, and it's not some big surprise, it's not some big bombshell that, you know, this person is gay or this person's a lesbian. But that's not how we're going to handle it. We're not going to change the culture around it. Instead, we're just going to say they have to get out because they're probably communist, they're communist sympathizer, blah blah blah. I also want to point out too that like being lesbian or gay was also something that was extremely punishable in the USSR. So there's no evidence for this at all. Like we say that like they don't have good evidence, but there truly isn't. And once again, this just becomes a way to attack minority communities that make you uncomfortable, that challenge the status quo, that challenge like what is acceptable is what this is a tool to do.
You said USR? Is that what you said?
USSR.
And that stands for?
That is the Soviet Union. That's like Russia in the 50s, 60s, 70s.
You know what, y'all? This is why Kaylee handles our history episodes, and I stay out of it. Not my thing, but I'm a great listener. Sometimes, apparently.
No, it's good. I appreciate this because I like having someone that I get to talk about this stuff with because this is my bread and butter. This is what I love to listen to and do in my free time.
I was like saying, I was like SSR or whatever it was. I was like, oh, some United States, something cool, maybe. But no, just kidding. I take that back.
Yeah, so the Cold War is essentially like America over here being like, we have nukes. And the USSR being over here like, we have nukes. Well, we could blow you up. Well, we could blow you up. And it's just going back and forth. And then there's the space race tied into it. There's so much more going on politically, but everyone's concerned that there's communist spies, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Okay.
So they launch into a massive investigation, particularly in colleges, where they use heinous interview tactics to try to get students and teachers to out one another and other faculty members. So, for example, they would profile and target girls who were intramural sports because they say, oh, there's a high concentration of lesbians in intramural sports. I listened to an interview of a victim and she was like, I mean, we were, but still. And so like there's examples of they would take these students one at a time into a room in the basement or in a local motel room and keep them there for 15 to 17 hours, interrogating them. No bathroom breaks, no food, no drinks, asking them extremely detailed, extremely explicit, have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? Who have you done this with? Blah, 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 blah. Like, awful stuff. And the goal is to try to get people to give names. And that's why they're keeping them there. Yeah, yeah.
If I was a parent, I'd lose my shit. I hope someone's parents lost their shit.
I hope so, but instead,
truthfully, I don't know if they would have.
There's actually an interview, or like not interview, but a video clip that I saw of like these guys, these like private investigators from the Johns Committee, talking to this auditorium. I think it's in UF. This auditorium of students that are like 18, 19, and being like, well, you should come forward or you should just unenroll and leave because how would your parents like to find out that you're a homosexual? And you can like see it on people's faces of like, oh my God, my parents would kill me. And yeah, it would have been extremely unacceptable. So instead of parents getting all like up in arms, and I'm sure that there are cases of parents being like, absolutely not, you have no right to do this. But generally it was just like accepted that because this is a bad thing and shouldn't be there. Sometimes like the interviews would involve like lying that like, oh, well, so-and-so outed you. We already have your name. So you should start giving us names of people until it just becomes like this witch hunt. And it was very popular. This was happening at UF. It was happening at Florida State. The committee utilized school resource officers and local law enforcement. Police would stake out bathrooms where supposed homosexual encounters were happening and then apprehend people. The other stories of like cops like hanging out in these bathrooms and then like peering into stalls and arresting people.
That's so
arresting
gross.
People whether or not they were having sexual activity, because it's like, well, you frequented the homosexual bathroom, and it's like, what?
The freaking bathroom.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, there's videos of these investigators talking to large classrooms of kids, telling them like, oh, it'd be really unfortunate if your parents found out you're a homosexual. They're also coming after teachers, any teachers that were suspected of being homosexuals, and were getting them fired and like ruining their careers. All in all, it was like extremely invasive and inappropriate. There is a really good documentary. It's like 26 minutes, put together by students at UCF. It came out in 2016, won a lot of awards. I watched it. You can watch it for free on PBS. Yay, PBS. I highly recommend it because it has actual interviews of some of the victims. I have an interview with one of the local law enforcement guys who kind of got sucked into this. And from like his perspective, his thing is like, well, I never had a problem going after criminals, but like, it's not criminal to love somebody or whatever, which I don't know how much. I don't know. Can't judge the guy. It's not my job to judge the guy, but it was interesting. But like the one lady who was interviewed, she like talks about like, no, they're getting extremely explicit with like, have you ever done this to so and so to blah 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 blah, and like I am extremely uncomfortable because I have like these guys yelling in my face about these sexual acts that I've never even like dreamed of. Like, you know, you're talking to 18, 19, 20-year-old kids that are, which I mean, I don't know if you can have it both ways, but I think realistically, if we're being honest, it is both ways. Like, they're very young. They're 18, 19, 20, 21, very young, very impressionable, trying to like build their life. And then also, they're still adults. They're still of consenting age that if this was something that they wanted to pursue, then they had the right to, you know, as far as like age of consent stuff. All right, so all in all, it results in over 200 teachers and students getting fired or expelled, and I'm personally unclear to as to whether that includes the students who chose to leave on their own accord before they had no choice but to be outed with a public record. So I imagine the number of people that were affected by this is actually much higher. Either way, though, we're talking about 200 people that were publicly outed, have this on their record. Like, this is a criminal offense. This is a sexual offense at this time. To have a consenting homosexual relationship is to be registered as a sex offender at this time. And so their lives are forever changed by this witch hunt. The Johns Committee eventually ends up doing itself in by publishing what would become known as the Purple Pamphlet. The goal of the pamphlet was to educate teachers and parents on the realities and dangers of homosexuality so that they could recognize that in their children and prevent it. The reality is, they published a heinously bigoted piece of supposed research that seeks to equate homosexuality with pedophilia and other forms of sexual abuse. You can find the pamphlet, like, in its entirety in an archive on UF's website. I read, like, half of it. And it's an absolutely terrible piece of propaganda. A lot of the news articles that cover it emphasize the fact that it's poorly put together, that it's designed to be inflammatory, and that it was extremely poorly received by the public, who basically viewed it as like a piece of pornography that they were circulating. So they put out this pamphlet with the idea that like this is going to teach teachers and parents how to what to look out for, signs in their children and stuff. And instead, everyone's like, what is this? This is awful. Our tax dollars paid for this? Absolutely not. Unacceptable. Which is a good reaction, but it's just not a good reaction for the right reasons. It led to Charlie John stepping down from the committee and returning to his job in insurance, which is great. But what I found most alarming about the pamphlet is just how much it tries to link homosexuality and pedophilia. The pamphlet continuously denotes that homosexuality is not natural, and that's the result of trauma. It repeatedly mentions that pictures of young boys were recovered from the photography collections of gay men arrested. And I'm not arguing that this is true, because I'm sure that does happen. But the problem is that they really work to make it seem that every homosexual is also a pedophile. Every homosexual is going after young boys, which is straight up vile and false. Like, I looked it up trying to find stats. There's no connection to your sexual orientation and pedophilia. It's its own separate thing. But what this pamphlet over and over and over says is that we have to protect our children. And we're not talking about the 19, 20-year-olds in college at this point. We're talking about young boys. They even go so far as to share a collage of pictures of a young boy posing in his underwear, which is extremely uncomfortable to see. And I don't know how it's even legal to publish that with him being a minor. It's insane and straight vile. And the way that they're framing it is like, well, this was recovered in like one photography collection. And it's like, well, that's one example. That does not mean that every gay man is also a pedophile.
You know what's also crazy, though?
Mm-hmm.
Just off of a quick Google search, from a report in, like, 2021, that 57% of sexual abuse offenders, sexual abuse in general, 57.5% were all white men.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to put it out there, that was 2021, 4 years ago. That's our research. Now, granted, that's only sexual abuse, but to try to compare the two and, like, say that homosexuality is pedophilia is actually insane.
And it gets so much worse. So
sorry, let's get back to it. I was just
No.
like, that feels.
No, I did the same thing because I was like, it makes this argument that, like, but see, they had pictures of little boys, and you're like, that's pretty damning. But it's like, we're talking one person's collection. Well, one person does not represent an entire catalog, you know? It's also,
So
there have been studies that say that, like,
pedophilia
no,
doesn't
pedophilia
just.
is its own separate thing.
Yeah.
And that usually does stem from abuse and things like that. But that is not the same thing as being gay or being a lesbian. What I found when I looked it up was that pedophilia usually stems from the person doing it feels more like a child themselves than an adult. It's not that they identify as gay or that they identify as straight. It's that they identify more as a child and therefore feel more aroused by a child.
Still.
Pedophiles, but it absolutely doesn't mean that there's not. What's happening is cops and investigators aren't looking at this from like a psychological perspective. They're saying, oh, well, it's a guy and it's pictures of a boy, gay. Because if it was straight, it'd be a guy interested in pictures of a girl. And that's not how that fucking works. Like, it's a kid. At this point, it's a totally different thing. But I think the thing is that we're looking at this the wrong way. They're publishing propaganda and presenting it as fact, and we're trying to argue about it as if it's fact when we know it's not. This is a piece of propaganda, and that's how it should be treated, and that's how it should be viewed. And unfortunately, it was not viewed that way at the time, but like that is absolutely how we should view it, and also how we should look at things that are similar that are being published today. How much of this is actually based on fact, or how much of this is propaganda being presented as fact? Okay. Also, I wanted to point out too, so that picture that I did include on there, so there's the cover was like these two guys passionately kissing. So that obviously set people up in flames. Like, they were trying to be inflammatory with that, but people were pissed. But then there's that other picture of the guy who's like tied down, and they're like talking about basically how like twisted it is, that they found examples of bondage. It's like, oh, guys.
People are so dumb.
Beyond that, they even make the statement that one of the problems in society is that people try to separate sexual predators and homosexuals. But that is incorrect, because in most cases, a victim of sexual assault can recover and live a normal life. But if someone is the victim of homosexual encounter, then they will forever be a homosexual, and it will mess them up forever. So it's actually worse than non-consensual sexual assault.
I fucking hate people.
Yeah. That's a whole section in there that like, oh, people want to separate sexual assault and homosexuality as two different things. But that's just not acceptable, because this whole pamphlet is working on the idea that homosexuality has no role in nature. It couldn't exist without it being done to somebody. So therefore it's bad. It has to be done to somebody for it to exist. And that's just not true. Also, there are examples of homosexuality in nature all the freaking time.
That's a good point.
I mean, like, you can take it super, super simple on, like, examples. Like, there's examples of, like, fish who, like, literally change gender throughout their lives.
What do people think of seahorses?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the male seahorse raises the baby. But, like, even just in common, like, farm examples, because I love that argument. People be like, well, if you go on a farm, you can see how things are supposed to be. When the cows come in heat, they start feeling themselves, the girls are humping each other. Are they, they're not making a baby, but they are trying. If you have a flock of chickens, I have this going on right now. If you have a flock of chickens and you don't have a rooster, one or two of the girls will assign themselves to the top of the pecking order, and they will try to mount and procreate with the other chickens.
I love that you have that problem right now.
Yeah. I mean, they're fine. Everyone's happy, and I'm not getting attacked by a rooster. I'm honestly quite okay with it. But I just hate that, like, oh, it doesn't exist in nature. It doesn't exist on a farm. And it's like, please. I was like 7 being like, the girl cows are trying to make a baby. So Pamphlet has lots of, like, awful things. It talks about the laws that are currently there to prevent homosexuality. And then it ends with a glossary of terms that
are stupid.
Clearly defined by cops. I feel like clearly trying to define gay things as straight cops. And then also a lot of different kinks.
Yes.
So yeah. It's just like, okay, you wanted to go there?
I think my favorite is degenerate.
What was the definition for degenerate?
Extremely sexual with any person, male or female, mentally unbalanced when sex is involved. Some have been known to use animals dangerous to gay and normal people.
What
It just
does that
makes no
even
sense.
mean?
Exactly. What does it even mean? So one, these
Everything
are
bad.
deviant acts is what they listed as, like, the glossary of terms. But then they also, like, mentally unbalanced when sex is involved. Like, come on, for starters. And then two, it's like dangerous to gay and normal people. So you are concerned for the gay people.
What is funny to me too is like going through this and it's like picturing well, in my mind, like family members or just like all these good little churchgoers getting this pamphlet in the mail that their tax dollars paid for, and then learning what a golden shower is and stuff. Like,
I find trade pretty funny too.
What was that one?
People who like to be passive partners in sexual relations with homosexuals, one-sided affairs. I don't know.
Why does this
Pushy?
matter? It also reminds me too, like there's always these moral panics. Like Jared and I have talked about this before. You like come home from school one day and your parents are like, "Have you heard of this?" And you're like, "What? No. Like, well, I saw on the news that SOS means blah blah blah," and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like there's always, I feel like every generation has something that like parents like hear about that are like, "Did you know that kids your age are doing this?" And I'm like, "What? I didn't know what that was until you just
wasn't
told
included
me."
in this, and I'm not sure if I believe you, but no.
Exactly. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that that's not. No, I'm pretty sure that that's not a thing. Okay. Anyways, but yeah, so public was not happy with this. Their tax money had been spent on this, and then just a year and a half later, the committee was disbanded. Yay, good riddance. There are so many stories too that, so like as we move on through our timeline, there are so many stories that deserve to be told in the 60s and 70s. But at the start of 1977, LGBTQ activists had made major gains. On January 18th, 1977, the Dade County Commission of Miami, Florida, approved a law that would outlaw discrimination against gays and lesbians in the workplace and housing markets. Commissioner Ruth Shack brought forward the bill, and the push was largely led by a gay lobbying group named Dade County Coalition for the Humanistic Rights of Gays. Jack Campbell, Bob Basker, and Bob Kunst were key members who helped push this forward. So this bill would have been groundbreaking nationwide. It was like Florida was about to be the first state to actually do something like really good for gay rights. And what this is saying is just that gays and lesbians cannot be discriminated against in the workplace. They can't not be hired or can't be fired just because of their sexual orientation, and that they can't be discriminated against in the housing market. So they have the right to work and they have the right to buy a house, is what this law is saying. Pretty good. Should have already existed, but like, okay, pretty cool that at least this is getting the ball rolling, and this makes Florida like number one. So yay, Florida gets a yay for that. Now, unfortunately, that bill also received a lot of backlash, with the most vocal dissent coming from Anita Bryant, a singer and former beauty pageant winner who began campaigning to repeal the ordinance. So this gets passed. It's huge, great deal. Like, yeah, they can't be fired. We can buy a house. That's amazing. And it immediately starts catching backlash, and this woman, Anita Bryant, takes it upon herself to lead the campaign against this and get this law repealed that has barely just passed. She took up the long-used argument that if gay people were not discriminated against, if they were allowed to work in schools and hospitals and public places, then it would be a danger to children. Her campaign was even called Save Our Children. So she creates this whole foundation called Save Our Children to take up this whole, just to prevent gay and lesbian people the right to work and the right to own a house. And she went around giving heinous speeches about how since gay people couldn't have children of their own, they had to recruit them. So once again, we have an example of tying gay rights to the danger of sexual abuse of children. When there isn't evidence for this, it's just extremely dangerous propaganda. It's using Christian morals to hurt other people and to straight up lie about reality. With Anita getting involved, the movement got nationwide attention. Anita was the spokeswoman for the Florida Citrus Commission, and once the Florida Citrus Commission came out in support of her crusade, there began a nationwide boycott of orange juice. So she's an orange juice influencer. She is a pageant winner and an orange juice influencer.
Shocker.
And then
Florida? Shocker.
She's doing nothing but giving all these speeches about how they're trying to recruit the children and go after them, and that they can't have their own kids, and that they cannot be allowed to have these jobs in society, blah, 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 blah. And that it's for the protection of her children. Like, she's worried about her young boys. And there was a little bit of debate. Like, people are like, well, we're going to boycott Florida orange juice. And they're like, well, we can't do that because, like, it could hurt the company, and the company's not to blame for her standpoint. Like, this was actually kind of a consideration. But then the company, the Florida Citrus Commission, comes out and is like, oh, no, we fully support Anita Bryant. And at that point, the rest of the country is like, okay, well, screw Florida orange juice. We're going on a boycott. So gay bars all across the country stopped buying Florida orange juice, and so instead of screwdrivers made with orange juice and vodka, boycotters would use apple juice. I think the success for the boycott is questioned, but Anita was fired from the Florida Citrus Commission 3 years later, so I think that is viewed as a win. Yeah. At least on that end. And, like, once her popularity, like, once she loses her job, her popularity kind of goes down. Save Our Children, like, that organization popularity kind of goes down. But that's still going to take some time. So I saw, like, a news channel video of this being covered in the 70s. So what happened is they got enough stink around it that the law was going to be voted on again. And so it was voted on in June 1977, and residents of Dade County repealed the ordinance by a large majority with a margin of 69 to 31, which was a massive loss. So essentially they got it repealed by like 2/3 vote. People decided that no, we don't want this. We don't want gay people to have the right to work or to live in homes. So that was interesting too. I saw, and I'll include this video, there was a clip of a news story covering like, oh, the vote's happening and it's been nasty on both sides. And it's like they show a commercial from the Save Our Children people, and it's like, this is San Francisco, and it shows like people on the street in San Francisco like partying or doing a parade, and like they're trying to bring these immoral values to our state and convert our children. And I'm like, oh, okay. And it's like, and then the other side has really nasty commercials too, and it's the commercials from like the gay alliances and stuff, or like whatever organizations put those together, and it's like people like reading over the Constitutions, like over liberty and justice for all. Well, you gotta cross out all, because not the homosexuals. Oh, but not this group is their commercial. I'm like, that's not a nasty commercial. That's just straight up. Whereas the other one's like, look at these degenerates on the streets of San Francisco. They're trying to bring that to Florida. But yeah, so unfortunately, she kind of wins. And that bill will not be reinstated until 1998. It will take 21 years for gay people to get the right to like work and like buy homes and not be discriminated against. So that is awful. She does take a pie to the face though. Someone does pie her in the face.
I saw that. I
She's
was gonna ask.
Yeah.
That's funny.
There is that. So we have that. As we move through our timeline, we got through the 70s. Now, as we approach the 80s, we have the emergence of the AIDS crisis, which was famously mishandled nationwide, but was especially bad in Florida. By 1989, Florida ranked number 3 in the country for AIDS cases, with an estimate of 8,000 cases. And Florida didn't have the population that it does now. But 1889, Florida is number 3 in the country for AIDS cases. And the AIDS crisis could be its own episode, and it will be in the future. I'm going to come back to that. But for now, I want to provide just a more generalized overview. Please forgive me, but I don't have time to get into it properly. This episode's already going to be pretty long. The AIDS crisis was extremely galvanizing, with conservatives, Christians, and the Anita Bryant type saying that this was God's punishment for the homosexual lifestyle. Because essentially, in like bullet points, what happens is in the 80s, all these young men start getting sick, and no one knows why. They were healthy before, and then they're sick, and sometimes like within weeks they're dead, and no one really knows why. Then people or doctors are able to like start putting the pieces together that it's homosexual men that are most affected. So for years, it's believed to just be a gay disease. Like even the president of the US at the time, Reagan, is like in public statements like saying, oh, it's just a gay disease. So why are you worried about that? Like there's disgusting press conferences where journalists are like, this is like how it's been going on for months now. Thousands of people, hundreds, thousands of people have died. And there's a journalist that's like, hey, what are we going to do about the AIDS crisis? Like, are we spending more funding? Like, and because people don't know what it is, people don't know how it's passed along. They just know that these young gay men are dying and getting insanely sick and dying horrific deaths and stuff. But we don't really know anything about it. And like the president of the United States is like, oh, why are you worried about the gay disease? Are you gay? And And it's like, this is a public health emergency.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the attitude of a lot of people at the time, was like, well, it's God's punishment for their sin. We're not worried about this as like a public health thing. Government didn't want to provide any funding. They essentially wanted to sit this one out and not deal with it, despite it being a major public safety risk. By 1993, AIDS had become the leading cause of death among persons between 25 and 44 years of age in the United States, accounting for approximately 2% of all deaths in the country, which is crazy because, like, you have in some cases 9 and 10 otherwise healthy young men getting diagnosed and dying. Along with the physical symptoms, there's just a ton of turmoil. Suicide rates went up for men getting diagnosed. Like, there were a lot of guys that would just get a positive test and then kill themselves because it would take time for doctors to realize, like, hey, some people that test positive still live a good life for many years. Like, they just didn't know, and there wasn't the funding to do it. You also had doctors that refused to serve patients. And there was like no one said like, no, you're a doctor, you have to. They're just like, it's not my thing. I'm just going to go about my daily life. And then you also have like the psychological effects of like, you get diagnosed with this, you get sick, and you have to tell your family that you're dying. And for a lot of people, this is like how their families found out that they were gay, which is so heavy. And then despite all that, despite like, you know, your son dying or something, you had plenty of moms and dads that were just like, well, you're not any son of mine then. My son wouldn't be gay. And disowning people. So, like, not only are you dying, like, you're getting disowned. Like, it's just absolutely horrific that this group is going through this, and then they're also being the punchline of jokes, you know? So, like I said, this could be its own episode. We'll get into it at another time. I'm going to link 2 really amazing episodes from a different podcast, Cool People Who Do Cool Things, Cool People Who Did Cool Things, with Margaret Killjoy, that I really, really like, that talks about different parts of the AIDS crisis. So I'll link those. One of them is about the organization ACT UP that was organized at this time because, like I said, government's not helping. In some cases, doctors aren't helping. In some cases, like, your entire friend group is dying around you. So there is an organization, ACT UP, that I forget, it's an acronym. It stands for something. I didn't write it down. You can see on the picture, it's got their logo, which became like a really big deal. And basically their thing is like, no, we need to make noise. We need people talking about this. We need research. We need money spent on this so we can figure out what in the world is going on. Because if you stay silent, silence equals death. So there's a great episode about that. And then there's also a great episode about, because a lot of doctors and nurses refuse to help and treat these gay men because they like saw it as like this moral disease, this moral failing disease. A lot of lesbian women who were nurses really stepped up and helped and created communities where they could help care for these men. So I will link both of those. They're very good episodes, but unfortunately, it will take until about 1987 when we start getting our first cases of heterosexual people getting diagnosed with AIDS for the government to start to take this seriously and to start investing money in it. I put an arrow at, like, you can see where the funding starts going up. And that's about the same time that we start having heterosexual people get diagnosed with AIDS. And that's because it is spread through blood. So if there's any shared needles or blood transfusions, things like that, it's getting spread that way. So at that point, then the government starts kind of taking it seriously and putting funding towards it. But yeah, so like I said, that's something we need to cover more. It's something I didn't know enough about at all. I didn't learn about that in school in any way. And the very little bit that I learned from my parents was just like, never touch blood, it could have AIDS. And I was like, oh, okay. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I was like, oh, that's some, you were a kid in the 80s, 90s stuff. That's where that came from. Okay. Like, still don't touch other people's blood, but still. Like, they were like, you could die if you see blood on the slide and you touch it, you could die. And I was like, okay. And then I became an adult and learned about this and was like, that's where that came from. But yeah, so what I want to emphasize here, the good thing I want, besides government neglect, what I want to emphasize is that because of all of this going on in the 80s, there was a huge rallying cry. And it really became this culture of like, we have to take care of ourselves and we have to take care of each other and we have to organize. Whether it's organizing to protest the government or organizing literally to provide food and housing and medical care for each other, we have to. So there becomes a lot more organization in the LGBT movement, which is really cool. And that helps lead in, like I said, like I mentioned, like the ACT UP group, but that is what kind of leads into a lot of the things starting to get pushed and happening in the 80s and 90s that we start to see. And this is oversimplifying a lot. This is not hitting on as important a milestones as it should. Like I said, I do want to cover the AIDS thing there. I know that there is a massive monument in Key West, AIDS monument in Key West that I think has the names of every known AIDS case in Florida, anyone that died.
Wow.
So that's really cool. So like I said, there's a lot of ground to cover there, but what I think is really important is that there really becomes this like culture of self-reliance and also organization to make things happen, to get things done. And that kind of mobilizes all across the country. Like it happens in Florida, but it's happening everywhere. So if you're gonna pick the rose from the thorns, there we go. It also made the lesbian and gay community like unignorable. For years, like now it's become like national headlines and everything. Yeah, so it wasn't just something people could be like, that doesn't really exist. That's not a thing. No, it does. Here it is. So yeah, okay. Which I think that's pretty much the story of gay rights from the get-go, and arguably how most civil rights movements go. A group of people are oppressed and have no rights. They are persecuted, imprisoned, beat, and sometimes straight up killed to keep them in their place. As they fight for their rights, they take one step forward and another one or two back, but they persist. It's like 1977. They get this one-of-a-kind law passed, and then it gets repealed within 6 months. And there is all of this backlash, but it gains national attention. I hate to think in the 80s and 90s how many lives could have been saved if it had been taken seriously, but it wasn't. But no matter what, the community was able to step up for themselves. And that is amazing and should not be de-emphasized at all. Like how much the community rallied and took care of themselves and made the country listen. All right, so real quick, I want to highlight and quiz you, Megan.
Boy.
This is interactive. Highlight a few more important dates for LGBTQ rights and wins in the state of Florida. Instead of going through like the last 25, 30 years, I'm just going to hit on the key points real quick since this episode is already pretty long. So, 1998, that anti-discrimination bill is passed again, 21 years later after it was passed the first time. So, Megan, what year did Florida sodomy laws become unenforceable?
Great question.
Any guesses? Nope.
2020?
One more try? 2003.
Mm.
In the case of Lawrence versus Texas, a landmark case in which the Supreme Court of the United States in a 6-3 decision invalidated sodomy laws across the United States, making same-sex sexual activity legal in every state and United States territory. So it wasn't anything that Florida actually did on its own. It was a Supreme Court decision that said, okay, same-sex sexual activity is no longer illegal in any state. And that happened in 2003. Up until 2003, it was illegal to have sex with somebody of the same sex, of the same gender.
That's ridiculous. That's insane. Ask me the question again. I got the answer this time.
All right. Next question. In what year was gay marriage legalized?
Not 2003. Oh, that was
2003.
That was pretty recent, wasn't it? That was like, oh God, that was like 2015-ish area, right?
2015.
Okay.
In 2015, same-sex marriage was legalized nationwide in the United States following the Supreme Court's decision in the Obergefell versus Hodges.
You know what? That's right. I remember that because there was a huge debate after that and huge issues with bakeries and stuff not wanting to do different cakes and different things like that. And people were getting their feelings hurt and were getting so upset. And it was really, really ridiculous. I mean, there was other things going on. Sorry, I just took a very generic, this is just a conversation I remember having me like, this is what you're upset about? This is stupid. Like, people not wanting to make cakes for, like, just make the damn cake. All your job is just to make the...
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Yeah, that was like a specific court case that I think did not go in the way that we would have thought it should. I don't remember. But yeah, that was a big case around that time. But yeah, 2015, and the same thing. It was a Supreme Court decision, so it applied to everybody. This was not something that Florida was able to pass on its own or get voted in. This was a nationwide thing. And that's saying to me that was only 10 years later. Like, I knew, and this is the other reason that I wanted to do this timeline and kind of walk through stuff, because 2015 was when I graduated high school. And, like, I knew that gay marriage got legalized, but, like, I don't know, as a selfish 17-year-old kid, I was, like, not thinking about it. And I was of the mindset of, like, yeah, of course it got legalized. Not realizing that, like, it is 2015. How is this not already legalized? So that was the other reason I wanted to, like, kind of highlight as I started researching, and I was like, I don't even know what I don't know. Let's just put this all together. All right. And then, Megan, what year were gay people allowed to adopt children?
Who can they? Oh, sorry. I'm assuming...
Not a trick question.
I am assuming a couple years later. I'm not going to say 2025, but I'm going to say at least probably like 2020, 2023.
So actually, Florida's ban on adoption by gay individuals was overturned in 2010, and then the ban was officially repealed in 2015.
Things don't make sense here, but that's okay.
I know. Yep.
Okay, so 2015
exist.
Officially legal. It was legal. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So I'll just summarize all this real quick, because I do have like a final point that I think is really important. So covered a lot of stories. There's so many more stories, both on the inspirational activist front and also on the people just doing terrible, awful things because they think they can, because they don't view gay and lesbian and trans people as human. And what I found so frustrating when I was trying to tell these stories is it's like the example of Anita Bryant, of like, oh, hey, we got this thing passed in 77, and then 6 months later, it gets repealed. So now it's going to take 21 years for that to happen. And how frequently this argument that, like, it's harmful to the children, we have to protect the children, gets used, even though it doesn't have any support. And you want to go, well, Anita was more or less unsuccessful. Like, Save Our Children dropped down in popularity. But then you start looking up articles, and it's like, well, no, you've got DeSantis's Don't Say Gay bill in 22, which is essentially trying to call trans specifically, but also like homosexuals in general, but specifically trans people, groomers, and that they're after the children, and that we have to protect the children. And obviously, yes, we want children to be safe, but we're not looking at the correct enemy here. We're creating a monster where there isn't one.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't about protecting children. It's just like the McCarthy trials and the Johns Committee. It wasn't about communists. It's about keeping control and being able to target a group. So we're allowing people to use children as the reason to hate other people and to keep other people within control. And I just think that we should really keep that in mind. And I think, in general, my conclusion here is that while I always wanted to find an overwhelming victory story to share for Pride, that was nearly impossible. For every 2 steps forward, we seem to take at least 1 back. But I think that's kind of the point. Pride is a celebration that has been hard fought, with literal blood and tears and protest signs. It's been fought in courtrooms, doctors' offices, and on the streets. It's never been easy, but the LGBTQ community is still here, still fighting, still living, and hopefully thriving. And that's why Pride matters, and why it's important to celebrate and acknowledge and support.
Yes, ma'am.
So yeah, that's my point. Hopefully it wasn't too intermedial for anybody if you've got much more LGBT history than I do, which isn't hard. But yeah, I just think it's so important, and I think it's insane that we're still dealing with so much of this now, and that there's so many parallels. Like I said, I wanted to look up, I saw several news articles kind of mention about these trans women in Miami in the 70s that were like targeted specifically by cops and then sexually assaulted, and it seems like it was this whole scandal. And I was like trying to look it up, and I couldn't find hardly any information or any news articles about it. Instead, I found a news article from maybe a couple months ago of a cop in Miami who baited a trans woman into his apartment after they met at a club and then tried to strangle her. Allegedly. This is all allegedly. Some of the charges got dropped. But, like, that's a current news article. And that's from me trying to look up stuff about trans women and cops in the 70s in Miami. So, I mean, the Don't Say Gay bill is just like a perfect example. This whole like vendetta against drag queens and trans men and women like across the country. I think it's just insane that how much of this is still parallel. And it's like, well, if we can look back and be like, that was really wrong of people to do in the 50s, that was really wrong of people to do in the 70s, then maybe we can apply some of that logic to today. And also, hopefully, if you're like, I don't get the point in Pride, like, why do you have to flaunt your sexuality? Like, I think this episode really highlights that it's not that. We're, like, celebrating the right to exist, to live a life, to be who you are. And that's really impactful, and that's really powerful. And that's what it's about, and that's our point, and that's where we're going. And I'm going to stop rambling. Do you have anything you want to add, Megan?
I think overall it's a really great episode. It was extremely eye-opening, just because I don't think the history of where we started and where we're at now is talked enough about. Also, the fact that it's 2025 and I don't think we've made enough progress in the way we should. It seems, not even seems, it has been a 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, you know? And so talking about it and making it more aware, if it wasn't such a back and forth and such a hard fight and there wasn't blood, tears, all of that being shed for simple rights, then I don't think there would need to be a Pride Month that's being expressed every, like, you know, there wouldn't be need. I don't think there would be needed to have so many parades and things. Again, I just feel like if we didn't have so many steps back versus how many steps forward and the progression that we are to making these changes, well then, you know, maybe we wouldn't have a whole month just dedicated to pride and things like that. But in reality, we should have been more accepting and more opening and more wanting to, you know, learn and have the science and the facts and things well ahead of time if we wanted this to be different now. And we still could make it different, but we didn't. We've been fighting just normal people for forever now, and this is what's happened now. This is because I feel like if you don't have pride, if you're not expressing, you're not reminding people, children that aren't getting educated in schools, kind of like how we were, or depending on what religion they're growing up with, not that saying they won't have any clue, because I don't think there's a way to not know. But pride is a way of it's education that parents don't want their kids to know about. You can easily still learn about it and understand and have some type of understanding and respect, if that makes sense, you know? So.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is I think it gets reduced to like, why do you have to flaunt your sexuality? You don't know what goes on. Like, I don't need to know.
Stop viewing it as flaunting.
First of all, yes. Second of all, it's so much more than sexuality. Like,
it's not sexual.
No,
it's history.
For who I am.
It's literally history.
Yeah, I've been persecuted for who I am. That's why this exists. That's why. Like, this goes so much more beyond the bedroom or whatever. And I think that's huge. And yeah, at the end of the day, people have the right to exist and live and work and provide and have their own families and all of that. So yeah, hopefully everyone liked this episode. I really enjoyed researching it, actually. It was a lot, and there were so many things I learned, there were so many things I wanted to include, and I've tried not to include it all. Okay, I think that's going to do it for this week. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any story suggestions, you can email us at ourfloridapodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Our Florida Podcast. That's OUR, Florida Podcast, like... This is our state, like everyone listening. This is our Florida. This is our Florida podcast. It's getting late. I don't usually record at night. Anything you want to add, Megan?
No, I like this one. It was good. I'm excited. I think I'm getting ready to talk about Florida's invasive species and kind of a little about invasive species, like, you know, I think like a wide range, basically. I feel like a lot of people forget there's invasive plants, invasive insects, not just like your animals, not just like the ball python or... but the Burmese python, the pythons, okay? Yeah, it's late. So yeah, getting that ready, and some tortoise information, I think, too. So I'm really excited for that one. It's just a lot. It's kind of like the FWC and the black bears, because there's way more behind it than what I knew, and it's been going on for so long, and they play such a huge role. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that one. That was like a personal request. Yep. I don't know where my next location will be. Even if I told you now, it's probably going to change in 2 weeks, but it'll probably have to do with where we're spending my birthday.